This book was written by Anne B. Ross. Miss Julia delivers the goods. This one is for my John and his boys, Jack and Jake. Chapter 1. Miss Julia. I turned from the rain-streaked window of my bedroom to see Hazel Marie's head poking through the half-open door. Come in, Hazel Marie. Are you feeling better? A little, I guess, she said, edging into the room. Are you busy? Not at all. I could use some company. I don't want to bother you. You're not bothering me, I indicated. The easy chair opposite mine by the double windows. Come, watch the rain with me. I thought we were having another dry summer, but just look at it come down. Hazel Marie sat down and, like me, turned to look out at that soggy yard. Dotted now with stunning puddles of water. I I not turned on any lights, although the dim room could have used some, so we sat in a companionable silence for several minutes. After a while I frowned, recalling that she'd bypassed breakfast, saying that she wasn't hungry. Now here she was, doing something else unusual. It wasn't like her to sit any length of time without chattering away about something. She was normally full of wonder and awe and bubbling over about one thing or another. I liked that about her. You would think that after some years with me, she'd have become used to a life without financial worries. You would have thought that she'd have begun taking her carefree days for granted, but she hadn't. Oh, she enjoyed herself immensely. Don't get me wrong, but the most endearing thing about her was that she was so eternally grateful for her good fortune, even though it had come at the expense of my knowledge that she'd carried on with my first husband in such an inappropriate manner. But that carrying on had produced a child who covered a multitude of sins. Lloyd was no kin of mine. Try as I, try as I might, I couldn't figure out any relation. There was no name for a husband's child by another woman. But that didn't stop a kinship between me and that boy. Went beyond bloodlines. Lloyd was more like me than any child I could have had, but didn't. And his mother was like a ray of sunshine in my life. As long as I didn't dwell on what she'd done, and I didn't because her sweet disposition and wide-eyed wonder at whatever came her way made me value her for herself alone, without letting her unsavory past poison the present. The only thing I could never figure out was why she'd been attracted to Wesley Lloyd Springer. In the first place, he was certainly no bargain, although I may be prejudiced. In fact, in fact though, I don't think she was ever specifically attracted to him. I think he found her when she was at a low point, which was where she'd been since birth, and took her up. He gave her a place to live, such as it was, and then she found herself with a child, and that was it. For a good many years, she wasn't the first woman to find herself trapped with a man she neither liked nor loved for the sake of a child. Her first taste of freedom, and mine too, for that matter, came when Wesley Lloyd passed, and I was finally able to put aside my terrible anger and open my home and my heart to my husband's mistress and their little son. All the while, these thoughts were running through my mind. She sat out the window, she sat staring out the window, her elbow propped on the chair arm and her chin on her hand. Hazel Marie, I said. Is something on your mind? She sighed, looked down, and began to fold pleats in the cream-colored crepe trousers she wore. I'm not sure, she mumbled. Well, I can see that you're worried about something, so tell me, and let's try to fix it. Then a jolt of anxiety shot through me. Is it Lloyd? Is something going on with him? Oh no, he's fine. He's almost finished with his summer reading list. She glanced up at me, then down again as she pleats she'd made. You know how organized he is. He's really enjoying the tennis clinic too. Then Mr. Pickens? Is he worrying you? I could see how he would, since he was as stubborn as a mule when it came to settling down, which, considering the favors I assumed that she granted him, he should have done some time ago. Of course, I didn't know for sure that what went on between them, but I hadn't just fallen off the turnip truck. No, she shook her head, her eyes still downcast. No, Jade is all right too. It's just, oh, Miss Julia. She looked up again, and I saw tears swelling in her eyes. I leaned toward her, concern in my voice. Hazel Marie, what's the matter? Oh, Miss Julia, I think, I think something's bad wrong with me. Chapter 2. You mean you're sick? Alarmed, I leaned over and clasped her hand. I think I am. I'm afraid it's something terrible. She nearly choked on the word. Wait now. I had to take myself in hand in order to reassure her, but it was hard. I wanted to appear calm and rational in spite of the dire possibilities that were rushing into my head. Tell me, why would you think that? What are your symptoms? Or it is just a general feeling? I don't know what it is, but I'm just so tired. I can hardly do anything. I feel like crying all the time. Just sudden like, sometimes I feel real happy and then all at once everything just falls apart. Mood swings, I said, nodding as if I knew that meant. What that meant. What else? Well, I don't have much of an appetite, and anyway, everything I put in my mouth comes right back up, and I get so hot and sweaty sometimes, and I have to change my clothes. She wiped her eyes and went on. The worst thing though is that I just can't keep I just can't keep anything down and I feel so weak. I can hardly move. How long has this been going on? I've been feeling bad, tired and sickly feeling for a good while. But real throwing up just started last week. And now I think I'm running a fever. Why, Hazel Marie? I wish you'd told me. I know you'd been looking a little peaked, but I had no idea you were having such a hard time. To tell the truth, I was upset with myself for not looking after her better. I want you to stop worrying now, because we're going to get to the bottom of this. I'm so afraid, she said as she buried her face in her hands. So afraid that I've got something bad and maybe already given it to Lloyd, and to you, and everybody else. I didn't mean to. It's just gotten worse and worse. I'm so sick to my stomach. I can hardly stand it. Hazel Marie, I said, squatting down beside her chair to put my arm around her shoulders. I knew I might never get up again, but she needed comforting. Hazel Marie, listen to me. I don't think you've given anything to anybody. Now, one more question. If you don't mind my asking, what about your times of the month? She looked up with a tear-streaked face. What about them? I mean, how are they? Normal, erratic, or non-existent? They're well, and never have been exactly regular, so it's hard to tell. Well, when was your last one? I don't know. Sometime last month, I think. Maybe the month before. Then I'll tell you what I think, I said, leveraging myself up on the arm of her chair. I think you have a female trouble. And I know you'll hate to hear this, but it would just be the change of life. At her shocked look, I quickly went on. I know you're a little young for it, but it hits some people early. And who knows? It could be strung out over 10 years or more. Actually, Hazel Mary wasn't all that young. Somewhere in her 40s, she was always vague about exactly where which made putting candles on her birthday. On her birthday cakes. Somewhat of hit or miss proposition. She was like me when it came to age. It was nobody's business. What the number of our years happened to be. 10 years? She cried. I'll go crazy before that. I'm feeling awful, Miss Julia. I couldn't stand it that long. Well, goodness knows. I'm no doctor, so I could be wrong. The thing to do, though, is to get you to a doctor and find out what's going on. When did you have your last checkup? I don't know, not in a long time. Anyway, I never get sick and this is just doing me in. Well, we're going to do something about it. There's no reason for you to suffer like this. And I expect they've got medication now that they didn't have when I had the same malady. And listen, Hazel Marie, remember that every woman goes through it, and most of them survive. So you have to bear up. See a doctor and do what he tells you. I'll call Dr. Hargrove right now and tell him he has to see you. If he thinks you need to go to a specialist, well, you get one of those too. Oh, she said, a stricken look on her face. You think it's serious, don't you? Other people don't have to see a doctor when they go through the change. I mean, it's supposed to be normal. Yes, they do. They just don't tell anybody. Now you run upstairs and get ready. I'm calling Dr. Hargrove. I'll help her out of the chair and watch as she wove her way out the door. She was feeling miserable. That was what that was plain to see. And scared half to death. And to tell the truth, I wasn't feeling much better. It was easy enough to pass off her complaints as change of life, like she said. That was normal, but even with my meager medical knowledge, I knew there were other things in under and heading of female trouble that could cause same symptoms but were far from normal. When something starts messing with hormones and the organs and the glands that produce hormones, it could be a lot more serious than normal, but rocky time of life. And she was as just at just the right age, whatever that was for her eternal works to start acting up. I wasn't about to suggest anything light to her, but my internal works were boiling over with worry. Not the least of the worries concerned her temperature. I heard of menopause causing almost every symptom in that book, but never a fever. I sat in a doctor's waiting room, trying to calm my nerves. I had to insist that his receptionist put Hazel Marie on the schedule, even though the woman had kept telling me that the schedule was full. This is an emergency, I told her. So surely allowances can be made. And of course, she had something to say about an emergency, and that had lasted 4 days, hardly qualifying as urgent. I would have reported her to Dr. Hargrove, except he wasn't there, off somewhere in the middle of the ocean on a cruise. Of all things, at the end of the summer, So Hazel Marie was inside being seen by some new and unknown fill-in doctor, and who knew that his qualifications were. After the receptionist came in and allowed us to come, we'd ended up waiting a full half hour before Hazel Marie was called into the examining room. I gotten up to go with her and was by stopped cold by a bossy and unsympathetic nurse. So I was trying to calm myself down. First, for being overcome in a hurry, and second, for being shut out of whatever was going on behind those closed doors. And there wasn't any current magazine in place. Mrs. Murdoch? I looked up to see that same nurse beckoning me. You can come back now. I hurriedly gathered my pocketbook and followed her down the hall to a small examining room. Hazel Marie was sitting on the examining table, looking so pale and weak, and I feared she might fall off. Hazel Marie, are you all right? She looked. She shook her head. I feel terrible. I just threw up all over their floor, and they put me in here while they clean it up. I'm so embarrassed. I couldn't help it. Don't worry about it. I expect they're used to it, and if not, they should be after making people wait so long. Now, what did the doctor say? The doctor opened behind me, and in walked the poorest excuse for a medical practitioner I've ever seen. He was tall and lanky with a long face and slumping shoulders, and Lord help us, an earring and a ponytail? And I suppose to counteract those feminine accoutrements. He had a sprig of whiskers right below his lower lip. From the looks of him, I expect that was all he could grow. I could perhaps have overlooked all that, but the man was wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt under a white coat, and on top of that, he had two revealing sandals on his feet. And believe me, the revelation was not pretty. And to cap it all off, he looked barely 20 years old. I couldn't help but wonder how he'd ever gotten into medical school, much less wait, aray sus. How are you doing here? He asked, walking right walking right up to Hazel Marie and staring down at her. Feeling better now? She shook her head, and I got ready to intervene with a few questions of my own. He beat me to it. Turning swiftly to me, he said, I'm Dr. McKay, but call me Rick. I'm filling in for Dr. Hargrove for a couple of weeks, and you're Hazel Marie's friend? Julia Springer Murdo, I said, offering my hand and put off by his casual manner. I should say, Rick, this wasn't a social occasion by any stretch of the imagination. And you're from? Down around Wilmington. I meant, from what school? Ah, he said with a slight smile. Chapel Hill, and I'm with a group of locum tenens, which means I know what it means, and I don't mind telling you that I'm distressed about Dr. Hargrove being gone and not telling us he'll run in a substitute. I expect you'll do fine though, if you follow his instructions. Now, what's wrong with Hazel Marie? I'm worried about her. Well, I am too, he said with a frown, which did nothing to or reassure me or her. Hazel Marie, I'm not finding anything obvious, other than dehydration for the vomiting, and that's causing the fever, I think. But at this point, I can't rule out some kind of systemic infection. Have you been out of the country lately? Just to San Francisco a couple of months ago, Hazel Marie said. Oh, and I went to Mexico earlier this year, but I was real careful what I ate and drank. Dr. McKay frowned. Still, with all the gastrointestinal problems you're having, I don't want to overlook some sort of parasitic invasion. Well, we'll admit you to the hospital and get some intravenous fluids. Started and do some blood work. And while you're there, run a few other tests. We'll know something after that. Now, Hazel Marie, I want you to go right on over the hospital and get settled. I'll order some medication for the vomiting and we'll get those tests started. Parasitic invasion? I was stunned at the thought immediately, wondering if I should call Lillian and tell her to get out the Lysol and start wiping down the walls. I opened my mouth to ask if we were talking microscopic infestation or would be able to see them, but never got a chance. Dr. Marie patted Hazel Marie's thigh in an altogether too familiar manner, whirled around her, his long coat fluffing, and sailed out of the room. Doctors never hung around very long in case they're asked something they don't know. The hospital? Hazel Marie looked at me, fear itching her face. I don't want to go to the hospital. It'll be all right, I said, trying to reassure her and myself in Dr. Hargrove's absence. I'm sure he's just being on the safe side, checking everything out. Actually, Hazel Marie, I'm glad he's doing that. He's awfully young, so he hasn't had time to get much experience. I'd rather he do too much than too little. Lord, I thought, how much would a short-to-ship telephone call cost me? I drove Hazel Marie the 3 blocks to the hospital, wondering all the while if parasites could jump from one person to another. I didn't have time to worry too much about it, though, for I had to stop twice to let her lean out the door to throw up. If I hadn't already known how ill she was, the fact that she totally ignored what the rain was doing to her hair would have clued me in. By the time we got there, it was all I could do to go through the rigmarole it took me to get her in and out of the admitting office. They were so accustomed to filling out forms and filing insurance claims that they couldn't understand a cash deposit. Hazel Mary had insurance. Sam and Binky had seen to that, but she didn't have her card with her, and you would have thought she'd come in naked, the way everybody in that office carried on. Before long, she was in scones in a private room, which I had to insist on, undressed and redressed in a flower-strewn hospital gown. I warned her not to get out of bed or she'd be exposing more than she wanted to. But there was a little fear of that. She didn't feel like doing anything but lying there and letting one nurse after another minister to her. First, they connected intravenous fluid to the back of her hand. Then, they shot her with something for the nausea and vomiting, which soon made her sleepy. Then in came a woman from the laboratory and started drawing vital fluids for all the tests that the young doctor had ordered. When they finally left her alone, Hazel Marie lay there, looking ashen, with dark circles under her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave her alone. Yet I needed to get home and let Sam and Lillian know what was happening. And I needed to get her some decent night clothes. Miss Julia, Hazel Marie whispered. I'm right here, Hazel Marie. Hazel Marie. What do you need? You'll look after Lloyd, won't you? Of course I will. Don't I always? No, I mean, she said, her eyes barely open. If I die, Hazel Marie, don't think me thinking like that. You're not going to die, at least not anytime soon. You just concentrate on getting well and put such thoughts out of your mind. I'm thinking of going on now, since Lloyd will be home soon. I'll bring him up to see you tonight. I patted her arm and leaned over to look at her. Her eyes were half open, but I don't think they were saying anything. Hazel Marie, I whispered, are you awake enough to answer one question? You want me to call Mr. Pickens and tell him you're here? My only answer was a soft snore. So, thinking, I guess so, I tiptoed out from the room and went home.